Okay, we're recording. Fantastic. So, hello, audience. Our 7 individuals out in the mountains, our survivalists. This is episode, I think, 32. Again, it hasn't been consistent with the recordings. They've been a little bit sketchy, and it's mainly my fault. In fact, it is my fault because there's some issue going on with my phone. Plus, I can't keep myself still for more than 5 seconds because my brain is constantly telling me that the Jews control the world and I need to do something about it. And that makes me agitated. Would you agree, James?
I would agree, but I'd also say it's partly due to the ingestion of MSG-ridden McDonald's.
And when you said partly Jew, is that Jew with a D or Jew with a J?
I mean, we love a pun, right? So take it as you will. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely partly Jew because how can it not be?
Yeah. Yeah. So for the audience, I'm sure you don't want to hear this, but I just had a McDonald's for the first time in like 3 years, and I swear on my life that I have stabbing pains in my testicles after eating a McFlurry and what they call those breakfast McMuffins. This is part of their plan. They want to make people like me infertile, and they know that their propaganda is eventually going to get to me, and I'm going to walk into a McDonald's and eat a McMuffin, and from there on, I'm not going to be able to have babies. That's part of their plan to rid the world of humans.
Oh, 100%.
True.
Like my bum hole might hurt or something will hurt because, you're eating poison. They probably want to do it in like a weird way, like fuck up your reproduction. So it's not like they want to kind of like cause death by proxy by you not producing life in the first place. So rather than having someone alive that they have to kill, they just want less people being born. So yeah, why not use the world's most successful and frequented restaurant to do that? Perfect.
Fuck, when we think about that is the most frequented restaurant on the planet. And then it's minions, its subsidiaries and partners are like KFC and Subway and bloody Burger King and all that shite. People, you know what? People can put whatever shit they want in their mouth because, frankly, I have zero respect for most people. But you know what? When they take their kids that are fucking wearing a mask, which is insane, so they can't inhale oxygen and are constantly just inhaling fucking carbon dioxide, which is, brain damage inducing. And then they go and let their kids chug a load of Coca-Cola whilst fucking watching TikTok and playing games on some fucking phone, which makes the kid blind by the time it's 6 years old. And then they fucking just shovel this, I don't even want to call it food. What would we call it? This muck down the fucking trachea of every child without any nutrition, of course. And it's just, it bothers me. And this is why it bothers me, because from a self-interested perspective, at some point, my children are going to have to come into contact with this fucking rabble, and they're going to be outnumbered. And as much as I can train them to fucking shoot first, ask questions later, there's so many scummy people in the world now that we are so outnumbered. I fear that they may not have a chance. It's like being a lion and being attacked by hyenas. A lion can fucking fight its way out, but not always. Eventually, it's going to be outnumbered.
Which then beggars the question, do you want to have children? Do you want to have children?
Yes, I do. I think there should be more of me in the world, 100%. I think the whole world should be populated with my offspring. Imagine what a great world it would be.
It would be greatly fascinating. In fact, an island of Johns would be interesting.
It would be an army. It would be an army on an island. An island army.
I was just thinking, like, how long would it last before it imploded or some kind of?
I don't know if it would implode. I'm not sure because if there's multiple versions of me, albeit slightly different, because our environment shapes and to a large extent. But obviously, if you live on an island and you have the same,
there will be minimal variation in the nurture.
Absolutely, and if they're versions of me, by the laws of logic, they should be fantastic.
One would hope. One would hope.
I don't hope.
Full of it, and I was thinking about, and I was just thinking, like, driving through London, like, if everybody drove like me, the roads would definitely be a better place. It'd be much less traffic for sure. Yeah, there'll be much less accidents because I've never caused one in, and I have many years of driving, 20 odd years or whatever, maybe a bit less than that, 17, 18 years of driving. But yeah, in some ways, yeah, there'd be some problems. There'd be some problems, I'm sure. Not sure
Moral
it'd
then.
be, but there'd definitely be problems. I would definitely cause problems if everyone was me somehow. Which actually brings us on to the topic of just of culture,
Yeah.
country, culture and countries and people, and which ones are shit and which ones aren't. And I suppose all of them are. My conclusion, like spoiler alert, is that they're all shit and they're all good in some ways, but you know, we can kind of go around. Obviously, some have more shit things than others, I'd say. And
So no, go for it.
yeah, and it's a ever-changing landscape, right? Because you know, some countries that used to be cool then have like laws and legislations brought in suddenly that make them uncool, and so it's ever-changing. And like there are places culturally, like 30 years ago, they're unrecognizable to what they were today. So yeah, it's going to be a bit of an interesting dive, this one for sure, and especially with somebody as well travelled as you've been over the past, what is it, 15 years? How long have you been? How long have you been
I'm getting
travelling?
old now.
Hundreds.
Disturbingly, I don't even know how old I am. I swear on my life, I was born in 1992. Am I 31 or 32? I think I'm 32, right?
Yes, and
No,
it's
that
fucked.
sounds.
Sometimes you think to yourself like you think like, how old am I? Yeah, and then that's when like you know that okay, I've been
You're
around
getting
for
old.
yeah.
Yeah. Yes, I'll be 33, magic number next year. I'm departing from gate 33 as we speak, audience, to Seoul. And this isn't episode 33, this is episode 32. That's 33 will be coming up. So it's a very appropriate number, as you all will be aware of, the numerological importance of that. I'm also looking at a number 3 right now. It's literally at my 12 o'clock. Unbelievable. Um, so, yeah, sorry, what was the question? I forgot it already.
Oh well, we'll just talk about countries and which ones are shit and which ones aren't.
So what you said with respect to it's a cycle. Completely agree with that. I think
Yeah,
every corner of the world, and within each corner, each kind of subgenre of that, each province, each municipality, each you slice and dice it as many times as you want, and you'll always find a difference. And all of those differences have their ups and downs, their peak, their plateau, and their demise. But I would say that it's from a inorganic standpoint. There is obviously organic levels to life, and there's a point where we can run fast when we're children, unless you've got 0 legs and 0 arms and you're born blind. But for most people, they're fittest when they're young, when they're teens, and when they're about to fucking go 6 feet under, they're obviously less agile. And I think that goes for everything in culture too. However, I think the reason that we see this this archaeology prevalent in all corners of the world, which really highlights the utter demise, the complete capitulation, and removal of certain cultures throughout the ages. That is a derivative of a inorganic process. That isn't something that's just naturally kind of spun out of control and kind of veered off center. These are references to entire civilizations that have been knocked off, and it's a purely the origin of such is logic from a business perspective. It's logical from a business perspective. It's what is undertaken every day in the financial markets. You build a company up, you build its brand. Say Amazon is one such example, and then you knock it down, and that's how you maintain this kind of perpetual capitalistic endeavor. Just as the term that we've been provided, capitalism isn't really real, and neither is communism. These terms are actually defunct. But given that we have to, supplant something into the arena when explaining things, then we use capitalism as a kind of as a determination of materialistic endeavor. The pursuing of consistent and constant purchasing for no real logical gain. other than to feed an addiction. And that's really what it's about. It's, getting societies addicted to a certain lifestyle and then pulling the rug from underneath them so they have nothing left. And I think we've spoken about this before and how people are so reliant on the internet, things like Google Maps, digital payment systems now, that when the system crashes, which it will inorganically very soon, hence why they're constantly talking about cyber attacks and these sorts of things, because they tell you what they're going to do before they do it. That's the genius of the fraternal orders and Masonry and the Kabbalah system and all these occultist governances that are really pulling the threads, pulling the strings. Everything that they do, they disclose before they do it. And even without that disclosure, anyone that really has a basic insight into, or I'll say not a basic insight from the standard perspective, but true insight, intrinsic understanding, can see that the world is a game. It's like a chessboard. There's only so many moves you can make, and these moves are perpetually made. And the next step is, of course, a globalist totalitarian agenda, which is already publicized. This is something that's published, that's spoken about by the various governances. That's why we have the World Health Organization, the United Nations, NATO, Interpol, all these international organizations that abide by no particular, rule set. They're cross-border. They don't really adhere to anyone. And that's the beginning of this kind of globalist 1984 Orwellian disaster. And the next step will be to enact a cyber attack, because if you really want to fast track totalitarianism, you have to remove everyone's ability to live, from an individualistic standpoint. So, the capacity to buy, to use physical currency, and that's obviously being removed as we're speaking. And then the digital system will enable them to track everything that we're doing. Our behaviors, analytics is the most important commodity of all. That's what's being traded left, right, and center. It's your behavior as an individual that is the most valuable thing to those in the higher echelons of society. And again, when a cyber attack takes heed, let's say, you'll be left with a system which is entirely self-reliant on the government, essentially a globalized welfare system, not dissimilar to what we had in the Second World War, when food ration tokens were the only means for which most people could sustain themselves and their families. So I think, just to wrap that a little bit up, I think that's what's coming.
Hopefully not, but yeah, if we're being realistic, that's what they desire at the very least. They tend to have like a contingency plan. They might say, okay, let's not pull the rug yet. Let's squeeze them for a little bit more blood, let's get a little bit more adrenochrome from the kids first, and then we'll enact the final bloodbath plan, where, everything descends into darkness. All the digital currency is gone, because they'll get you to buy into it somehow. So they then control everything, and then, as you said, they'll pull the plug on that, and then everything descends into anarchy, and at the very least digital anarchy. But we know that will lead to ultimate anarchy, because for the most part people don't know how to behave, and deviance is a natural human variant that exists. It's there. Is that something that's been supplanted at the time? I'm not sure. I think people are quite good at being shitty without any intervention. I think people organically definitely do shit things. And in many cases where, if anything, taught to be better, taught to behave some way culturally, in a way that's socially acceptable. But yeah, it's a real minefield. But I would say, for the most part, people are okay. People are pretty sound. Almost nobody's perfect, but there are definite natural positive inclinations that many of us have, and the natural deviant inclinations that many of us have also. Speaking of culture and deviance, like Israel, if we were to talk about a culture and its pros and cons, like, let's talk about Israel for a bit. Israel is this country that is literally the root of the three main religions in terms of, Judaism is the pillar of Israel, at least like officially speaking. And then born from the Torah, you had, Christianity, which was, then to the New Testament. And then after that, Islam. And all of these things are Abrahamic religions that were essentially set in motion by, allegedly, because they didn't create the Torah themselves. I believe it to be quite open plagiarism. However, yet ironically, this country is also the head of the snake and involved in, let's just say, all of the kind of like black ops, covert, deep state, international espionage, skullduggery that's been going on at least for the past couple of 100 years. At least, I mean, you've heard us talk about the reset before, and no doubt, the Zionist cabal, and I'm not. When I talk about Israel, I'm talking about a Zionist cabal, and Zionism is a derivative of, said state, said ideology, Judaism, Hebrewism, Israel, these things, kind of are all things that are affiliated to Zionism. So, when the word Israel is used, we're intelligent enough to know that not everybody in Israel is a Zionist or part of the cabal, but these are just loose terms that we use to give an identity to what we're talking about. And we're talking about culture, and culture is a general thing, as we know. So, yeah, pros. What are the pros of Israeli culture? Let's go. We'll go on. For me,
So
I'll probably say there's one, and that's unity. A
yeah, I was
lot
going
of
to say the
them,
same.
yeah, a lot of them seem to sing from the same hymn sheet. Can you think of any others?
None, zero. The language is disgusting. The food is not Israeli because Israel is a modern concept. It's an artificial creation, and the food is just a generic Middle Eastern food.
Yeah,
There's no
breed.
Israeli food exist. Um, the people are rude and uh, sizably. I would say their actions are sizably distasteful and more than often evil. If we are to look at the atrocities committed by cultures globally and the repercussions for those actions,
Hmm.
uh, Israel has the least level of responsibility and liability for whatever it chooses to undertake, given that it is a controlling factor in the world. The United States is, of course, Israel. Every time a US president is elected, the first place they go is to the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem with a yarmulke on their head, which I always find funny. And I'll tell you why I find it funny, because as you've introduced the topic with the statement that, Jerusalem is a city for Christians, Jews, and Muslims. So why, when visiting Jerusalem in Israel, do you feel obliged to go to the Wailing Wall with a yarmulke on your head? Does Donald Trump or Joe Biden, any of these characters, who are of course all fictitious, they're not real, do they wear Islamic robes, jalabas, when they go to Saudi Arabia? No, they do not.
No.
They go to a church when they visit London, perhaps St. Paul's Cathedral. No, they do not. The world is openly subservient to the state of Israel because the state of Israel is the primary origin of Jewish culture, they would state, and these are the people that govern the realm, and consequently, I find their culture to be most distasteful. Not necessarily the most distasteful, one of the most distasteful cultures on the planet. And I hope our audience recognize that we're willing to talk about these things because most people in the world are not willing to discuss such politically turbulent matters, mainly out of fear. And I think we've specified the quote before. It's not my own, but it's something that we can all relate to. If you really want to know who controls the world, it's those that you feel fearful about discussing. I can talk about India, I can talk about China, which represent 50% of the world's population. I can talk about pretty much any culture, but the moment I talk about Israel, there's always that thing in the back of one's mind, oh dear, perhaps the channel's going to be shut down. And thankfully, I'm retired, I don't work. So if I had a job, and I think this is the reason why a lot of people, or if not most people, the vast overwhelming majority of people that are politically inclined don't discuss Israel, or they're very careful with their words, is because the repercussions are immense. And really that highlights who the totalitarian entity is on this planet. And people forget too that this is a country that isn't condensed within just a landmass of the Middle East. There is no country to Israel. It's a Jewish culture, realistically. Israel was created to give the illusion that it's a relatively small scape, and, you know, of course, to unite people and the things that we end up discussing in this podcast. But the culture itself is a Bedouin culture, and it's a culture that exists everywhere, and I would argue has historically undermined many cultures. I think it would be an objective fact to state, and many people of Jewish origin state this fact. So I'm just relaying the same thing, albeit from a different perspective, that Jews have been chucked out of over 130 nations, 130 empires throughout history. No other culture, religion, or ethnic group has been removed from so many countries ever. So why then specifically are Jews discriminated against, as they would argue? Is it not because they discriminate themselves against every culture? And I think we can see from how the current period of conflict is playing out that there is zero liability for their actions. You know, the data set for journalists murdered and imprisoned for 2024 shows that Israel, relative to population, has imprisoned and killed more journalists than any other country. China officially has 38 journalists in jail in 2024. Israel has killed 59 journalists and has an equal number in prison. But China has 1.2 billion people and Israel has about 7 million. So when you calculate the level of disparity in those figures and who the true culprit for just the murder of journalists and the imprisonment of journalists, I believe, to be honest, if you added up every country in the world on that list, I think Israel would be higher than all of them combined. Now, I'd have to cross-check that, but given its tiny population and how its numbers are immense, I think we could conclude that might be relatively accurate.
Yeah, and by a country mile, because, you know, like you said, I think, China was like 160, Israel roughly around 60. How many times does 8 million or 7 million even fit into a billion? The maths are quite clear. Like, they top that league table by a fucking country mile. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And again, you know, journalism aside, and most of those journalists were murdered and imprisoned as a result of the Gaza conflict, which really says it all. Because, you know, this is a conflict that's been ongoing for, 6-7 decades, pretty much since the inception of Israel in 1947, and actually before that. And you know, the United Nations is just this fucking false flag movement. NATO, all of these organizations are just cabal institutions that give the illusion, almost like a financial body you'd have, you know, an adjudicator in, say, the UK for education or finance. It's the same principle in effect. It gives people the falsified belief that there are, you know, there's the possibility that if poor actions are made, then there's going to be some kind of liability for those actions, which isn't the truth. You know, having been intertwined with corruption and finance and these kinds of matters for a long time, I think we can both state quite comfortably and firmly that these adjudicating bodies never actually throw a big corporation under the bus or a big company. From time to time, they sprinkle a few independents under who perhaps don't have the funny handshake and aren't aligned to the fraternal organizations. But realistically, a company like Amazon, which I believe, with respect to the financial ombudsman in the United Kingdom, only has 11 complaints on file. So Amazon, that's the biggest retail outlet in the UK, if we're to include online services, and they've only had about 11 to 15 complaints made against them, which is insane. And out of those 11 or so complaints, I think only a handful have been upheld. And just to give you a comparison, Barclays Bank, who I made a complaint against recently, and my complaint was upheld, albeit for a very small amount of compensation, received 22,000 complaints in the same period. And Amazon has had 11. Of course, they've had more than that, but these complaints aren't taken up because of the corruption. There's, if you're an international corporation worth hundreds of billions of dollars, you don't get there through honesty. You get there through fucking people over, period. And I'm not saying Barclays is any different from that. But my point is that I don't know what my point was. We were talking about Israel, and I've gone. But the United Nations and NATO. Israel has been occupying the West Bank against the protocols of the United Nations and NATO since the 1960s, at least. That's nearly 70, 80 years, that they have been illegally occupying territory, and nothing happens. If any other country did that, at the very least, there'd be some kind of media attention drawn to it. But of course there isn't. And bearing in mind that, Israel bombs the hell out of mainly civilians each and every day, because there's no way to actually differentiate between military personnel and civilian personnel in Gaza or West Bank. So they just bomb the whole, they strip bomb the entire city, and they get away with it. And you've got to question yourself, what other country that has 7 million people in the world could get away with murdering hundreds of thousands of people each and every year? No other country could. So then you've got to question the motive. Why is it that this little country has so much influence? Because, economically speaking, they're not particularly privileged. In terms of land mass, they're not particularly privileged. They're a tiny little echelon of society. So what do they have? Well, they have historical influence over each and every government in the world. They are the financial body of this universe. All of the biggest companies, BlackRock, Vanguard, Reuters, every major corporation you can think of, every news outlet like CBS, NBC, all this stuff, it's all operated by people that identify themselves as Jews. And that's not a conspiracy. That's an objective fact. And everybody's too scared to talk about it because they know full well that there are repercussions. And the reason why there are repercussions is because the authority that is stipulated by these people in the first instance is a just one. It is not fictional. It is not Fugazi. It is not conspiratorial, because if it was, there wouldn't be the genuine backlash that actually happens when people criticize what is an evil ultra-nationalist state. It is the most evil country on the planet, and has been the case for 50 or 60 years, at least. Probably going back a lot further than that as well. And I'm being generous. Only since the inception of Israel we're discussing, which is 47. But that inception is a derivative of hundreds and hundreds of years of oppression. Banking oppression, which is their weapon, their tool to mediate between themselves and the various governmental entities around the world. Oh God, I'm glad we're not in an airport in Germany, because what I just said would be an arrestable offence. Again, highlighting the level of authority that they truly have.
Yeah, absolutely. As they say, the old apple doesn't fall too far from the tree, and the trusted allies of said evil state, the old allied forces. And this is where it becomes, because, familiarity can breed contempt. And then there's also the case of saying, it's better the devil as well. We're Westerners, people brought up in, English-speaking lands. And I'm really, fond of this particular English-speaking country, England, the country that, that essentially gave birth to places like, Australia, America, New Zealand, Canada to an extent, although the French and others had their say there too. And it would appear that we've been the muscle behind Israel, right? In World War II, for some reason, everyone thinks about World War II being this thing where Hitler was killing all of these Jews, and the Allied forces came in to help and save them, and then and then the Russians and the Italians were involved as well. But like, why was an atom bomb dropped on Japan when the war was about? And that's kind of something that's not really looked at. Like, I mean, I think people kind of know that, everyone kind of looks and, says that America's, a big fucking, it's like a bully with a gun, it's like a kid with a gun, kind of thing. But, who armed the kid with said gun? And once again, back to what I said at the beginning, it's like the operational hub, the head of the snake, when you go back, is the Zionists and the World Bank, and for lack of a better term, there'll be always a Jewish individual, in the hub. It's like, even when you look at like the main players in NATO, I think one of the chief military officers in NATO, his name's Rob Bauer, which is a Germanic name, and there is kind of like no information on like his background, like his like family history, where he's from, which is quite interesting. But Bauer is a very, like, there's plenty of Ashkenazi Bauers. It's just one of those names. I mean, there's lots of Germanic names, but Bauer in particular. So once again, it just shows that they will put their people in key positions everywhere. Absolutely.
100%. 100%. And, I think we spoke about this before, but it's always good to reiterate when something is, when it's appropriate to do so. And an example of that, which we've used, is the Oppenheimer family, not the Oppenheimer, although very appropriate to what you just said, who was I believe, the chief physicist in the designing of the atom bomb that was dropped on both Nagasaki and Hiroshima in 1945. But the Oppenheimer family that essentially governed De Beers, the gold mining, diamond mining, copper mining, essentially the wealthiest family in Africa to this day. It's a family trust, and I believe their declared wealth was around 15 billion to each individual personal wealth, not company wealth. So we're talking, and this was 15, 20 years ago. Each member of the family had about 50 to 20 billion GBP in personal wealth. Company itself is obviously phenomenal, but this is where it gets really interesting. So on Wikipedia, any major encyclopedia, they'll be regarded as Christians, but actually they were converted from Judaism. And the reason that they do this is because they don't want to draw attention to the fact that there is a disproportionate number of people that identify as Jewish within the realm of business. So either they delete their history from various internet encyclopedias, or they convert to another faith. And what's ironic about that is Christianity derives from Judaism. So there's absolutely no reason to convert from something which is a purer form to something that is a lesser form, unless there is an alternative motive, right? Or ulterior motive. You don't buy a 1997 Ferrari and then get rid of it for a 1996 in less condition. And I know that sounds like a horrible thing to say with respect to Christianity and Judaism, but Judaism is the origin of Christianity. So it wouldn't make sense to convert unless your purpose is to dissuade people from finding out your true past. And the Oppenheimer families of Africa, being the wealthiest, most exploitative families in Africa to this date, of course, Caucasian European, are in fact Jewish. But the encyclopedias state that they're Christian because that in itself aligns to the objective of constantly defaming European influence in Africa through the so-called period of colonialism. The authority behind it, i.e. banking, the financial practices which control all policy, always derive from the big banking cartels, the largest of whom is the Vanguard Corporation. Next is BlackRock. They're all operated by Jewish people. But of course, they don't want people to realize this and connect the dots. So they try and mystify the entire premise of that and, state that they're Christian, or, they just delete the history altogether, or they have their kind of subsidiaries run by various other national entities. But realistically, it all boils down to one centralized cabal. Another example, which I've talked about recently because I'm in Hong Kong, is Hong Kong Shanghai Bank, HSBC, is the most despicable organization on this planet. It derives from opium smuggling, which killed tens of millions of people in China in the 1850s and 1860s. And HSBC to this day launders Mexican cartel money and was fined $1.5 billion by the United States government, which equated to 3 weeks' profit for HSBC. The number of people that were murdered as a result of funneling and laundering cartel money is probably in excess of 200,000 people. And no one was in prison for that. And HSBC's origin is opium smuggling. It is opium dealing. Hong Kong as a port derives from the exportation of opium. And again, nothing happens with respect to this. No one's ever been jailed. No one's ever been, removed as a result of this. It's just slap on the wrist. Here's a fine, which, like I say, is 3 weeks' profit. And that's the largest fine ever issued by the US government, ever. And it was only 3 weeks' profit for HSBC.
And, what that brings into focus, essentially, in a nutshell, is that we're all at the mercy of a realm run by, psychopaths, sociopaths. You don't gain the power by being a nice guy for the most part. I mean, you should, and in theory, that shouldn't be. But the reality of it is you don't get in a position of influence unless you're willing to, stab somebody in the back or and quite literally as well, or unless you're willing to, sacrifice, children's lives or, and these sorts of things. And smuggling, opium or, or trafficking it, would be a better term, is, that'll be one of the lesser crimes that they've committed. Obviously, by proxy, it did kill, tens of millions of people. But that's something that's a clean crime for them, because they do it. They don't actually see it. They're not actually linked directly to the people that will be taken. They're not watching the people jack up and smoke their lives away. Of this heroin. It will just be a case of they know that it's gonna absolutely decimate the societies that that it's mainly taken in. But it's just an absolute, which is why I'm not too fussed about having children, because bringing them into a world for the culture.
Bring that on as well.
So
the whole discussion was in fact about whether James is going to have children or not, and we had to divert to Israel and these various subject matters to explain this.
Because culture and we're bringing them into the world, and people travel, and it's like, okay, talking about culture, kind of like what was in that? Okay, where are we? Where do we want to go? Where would we go? I think you said that one of your favorite places is Central Asia. I really like Europe. I've not been to Central Asia, but I have a real fondness for Europe, and especially places like Spain. Just like fairly, just like a fairly kind of like laid back food, okay. Stroke nice. I mean, there seems to have like lots of like international cuisine in these places anyway. Expense not too great. Language not too hard. Not a fan of it personally, but I suppose a fair amount of people speak English in these places anyway.
Sounds essentially British right now. Yeah, mate, bit of Spain. Language, don't like it so much.
Depends on where. Depends on where you go. But the thing is, though, is that a lot of people tend to like Spanish is generally seen as like, oh, it's a love language. Spanish and French, like these sexy, attractive languages, whereas like the ones that people don't like are the ones that I like German, for example. And a lot of Eastern European languages, Hungarian, Russian. Like I like these languages. I like the sound of them.
I agree on 100%.
Yeah, but I don't like the sound of French and Italian or Spanish particularly. Call me weird. I genuinely don't.
in Spanish, at least. It's irritating, but I think a lot of it derives from our perception of that culture. I think it makes it a lot worse. I'll give you an example, and I think you might have been waiting for this. India.
I mean,
Now,
I was waiting for the perfect alley-oop to like slam them in, but it's here now, so let's go.
okay, for a second, I know no one in the world will be able to fully imagine such a scenario happening because it's not just improbable but impossible. But imagine for a second if India was as polite as Japan and as efficient as Japan or Korea or China. Just for a second, imagine that that was possible. Of course, it's not, but we can try our best to imagine that while simultaneously they maintain their accent, their Hindi language. Do you think the language would be more appealing, or do you think it would be less harsh as a result of that? A part of me wants to say yes, because a part of me thinks that if a culture is pleasant and a culture is nice and it functions and we respect it and we like it, even if they have a really harsh accent. So, example, German. I find German to be what I feel is objectively it's one of the most disgusting sounding accents on the planet. However, Germans are very polite and it's a very efficient society. So I feel like they don't get the same level of backlash as perhaps they would get if they were as obnoxious and dirty as, say, India.
That's very true. However, controversially, I like the Indian language. I even like the Indian accent. It's like, but once again, it depends on how it's spoken and who's speaking it. And you make a very good point there. It's the energy behind things really permeates. Like, like here, like a cute, nice lady talking with a Hindi accent, and it's like, oh, it just sounds nice. Whereas, like somebody, who's harsh, I don't know, like let's just say, some kind of like Indian chav criminal, I don't know, ruffian of some sort. Him talking and like the energy permeates. It's like so he sounds rough. Growing up, where I've grown up around lots of like different Asian communities. Bangladeshi, Pakistani, Indian, Sri Lankan. And and there's many subcultures within like the Tamils, Sikhs, Hindus, Punjabis, and I feel like, and once again, like the way people behave or the ones that we see in certain places can kind of change our perception. So like when you go to, this is something that I find, my personal experience, is that I find that generally speaking, and like this is just I found that Indians have a good understanding of customer service and bartering when they're
No,
operating abroad, for sure. And
no.
I knew you would oppose it. It's like, okay, let me give you an example. It's like when I go, like, they know, like, let's say, like, when I was a kid, I'd go to like the chicken shop, and the guy would give me like, he'd give me like an extra wing because he understands that, okay, if I give him an extra bit of chicken, he might come back. You go to a shop, it's like, like discounts, like he'll be like, oh yeah, yeah, okay, yeah, take 2 of those and I'll give you a discount. And like, and like they say things to massage your ego. They call you boss. They call you sir. They call you these things, and it's it's nice. I feel like
I
they have an
think that
understanding of business and customer service. I feel like that's something that's good.
they don't
Oh
have
yeah,
any.
and their food's really nice as well, tasty.
I don't think they do have an understanding of business. I think their business doesn't extend beyond the corner shop. I think they have a really huge attitude problem, which all other cultures concur with, and they every culture on this planet would be very content if India didn't exist. I can't think of a single country that just enjoys India as a whole. Of course, there are things about India that are nice, and there are certain people within India that might also be pleasant. But if we're to generalize countries and we're to say, okay, this country's good, this country's bad, which we can do, we can objectively make those statements. Some countries are worse than others. Period for certain things. India is universally regarded as an irritation at the very least. And I would say that they have a huge attitude problem. I don't think they have good customer service. The reason they're supposedly being nice to you is not because they're giving you any extra benefits, probably because the chicken wings are 5 days old already, and they're undermining your intelligence. They think that they can work people, but it's so blatantly obvious that they're slimy and scammy. And I think the data sets speak for themselves, as we spoke about, requoting last week's discussion. Goa's tourism industry has declined for the first time without any natural disaster or any kind of economic issue to sponsor such this year, because everyone's realized, frankly, why would you go on holiday to India? You can go to Thailand, Vietnam, China. Anywhere else in Asia is literally a better option, including Pakistan and Bangladesh. India, shithole.
Probably true in terms of, I mean, once again, we're talking about Goa, which is one tiny place in a country of 1.6 billion, I think you said the other day.
I wish it was 1.6
and
billion. 1.6 billion is many, in my opinion. Because think right, that's 1.6 billion in India. Think of the Indian expatriates. It must be 2 billion at least.
in the whole world, yeah, there's got to be 2 billion. Yeah, easily.
Up to 25% of the world's population.
Let me think. How
There's
many? There's probably a couple of million here. There's a few million.
Everywhere. Bloody everywhere, man.
Yeah,
I mean,
I think 2 billion. 2 billion sounds about right. So yeah, there's about, which makes me think, like, how many people really are there in the world? Because in the whole of Africa, there are more people than there are in India. There's more than 1.6 billion people in Africa, in the whole of Africa, surely.
no, I don't think so. Not at all.
300 million in Nigeria alone.
Yeah, but Nigeria is the biggest country by far. Next from Nigeria will probably be, if I'm guessing, it would go Nigeria, Egypt, probably, Africa's not as populated as people think. Most of it's harsh desert. Namibia was only a few million people in Namibia, literally. Countries like Botswana and Zambia have relatively small populations. Chad, Niger, Algeria, Libya, the biggest countries, desolate, maybe 8 million in Libya. Likewise, around that figure, maybe less in Algeria. Chad, Niger, small populations. No, I would say, if I'm hazarding a guess, Africa's got sub 750 million, and that's a top of the head guess. If you can Google that for me, I'd be very interested.
1.5 billion with a growth rate of 2.32% a year.
I'm wrong, but it's still less than India.
Yeah, I thought there'd be more. I thought there'd be more.
Yeah,
okay.
Because the biggest land mass is desert, but I'm surprised it's that high, actually.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's probably the fastest growing continent in the world for sure. That's where the kind of economic future is not too distant either. But going back to India, it being the worst place in the world, I would hedge a bet that if we went to a sizable tract of each and every national population and we asked them to name 3 countries that they wouldn't want to see, A, the world ruled by, B, that they wouldn't want to have as tenants in their house, and C, just general annoyance and irritation, I think India would top all of those lists.
They're quite good. I think culturally, they're definitely good at business. I mean, they've done very well in the UK. The UK would crumble at Indians.
They just don't pay tax. They just slime off people. All of their products are out of date. They're probably all stolen. No tax is paid. And what people forget is the amount of money that these people make, because all of their workforce are their children. And, that sounds like a ridiculous joke, but if you employ someone in the UK, right, you have to have them being paid minimum wage. You have to fill out all the tax forms, all that kind of stuff. If you're a big corporation, you have to have health insurance, pensions, all that kind of thing. Every corner shop you go to that's run by Pakistani or an Indian, they have their children and their wives working for free 24 hours a day. Imagine how much money that saves you. So let's hypothetically say I set up a corner shop, right? Exact same shop, and I employ someone 365 days a year, one member of staff. I've already lost £30,000. straight away, right? That's a decent amount of money. If the Indian shop is opposite me and he is not paying anybody because all of his staff are his children working for free, he's up net 30,000, and with that extra capital, he can undermine my products. And that's how they make money.
Exactly.
They do it illegal.
That's sound economics. That's, I mean, keep it in the family, and fucking hell, why would you pay tax? Like,
no, I agree. But I'm just saying that they're not good at business. It's just that they have extra money because they don't follow the rules, and no one does anything about it because essentially they're foreign, and we have this society of if you're foreign, you can do what you want because otherwise it's racist. We'll only punish the white people.
No. I mean, you think that Indians get? I mean, honestly, like Indians getting away with opening a corner shop. I don't think it's because,
talking about the general population for sure. Foreigners, okay, look at it like this. Why would a foreign
get
person
harsher treatment in England? Foreigners generally get harsher treatment. There are certain laws in place. Let me give you an example. Like, if somebody comes over here as an alleged refugee, and they come over with children, they'll be given a place, and there are all of these kinds of measures in place. But I mean, generally, when it comes to housing, if you're in a certain situation and i.e. seeking asylum, those sorts of things are treated as like a priority, like in those cases. But if you're just somebody of Pakistani, Somalian, Nigerian, Albanian, whatever descent, and you start doing dodgy stuff, I mean, they'll come down on you as hard as anybody, if not harder.
There's no way to trace them. These people fly anyway. They're not going to allow themselves to be found. And I would also say, in addition to that, which is a very simple but solid argument, there is no reason why anybody would go to the UK unless you have the GBP, and it's certainly not for the weather, is it? It's for the advantages that French, British, and German cultures give you. You don't go there for the culture, the food, the weather, the general expense of living. You go there to save, to make money. I'm not talking about skilled workers. I'm talking about your average migrant worker, most of whom are there illegally. They're there to make money. They're not there to settle there. They make money to send remittances back to their family and then eventually save enough to go back to India or Bangladesh or wherever in the Middle East they're from. They're not there to settle, and they're there to take advantage. That's the reality. Look at have we walked in Birmingham? Look at these places.
Fourth and fifth generation, Indians here. So clearly they have settled, and they've literally made areas, like you've said, Birmingham or certain places, like their own.
So it's the second biggest city in the Western world to declare bankruptcy after Detroit in the United States, and it's because hardly anyone there is British. Because these are people that have come from a culture where life is so harsh that they're working all day, every day for maybe $1 a day, a couple of dollars a day. You get a fucking golden ticket to the UK, you arrive, and all of a sudden you just have to do a shitty piece of work. We're not even talking about hard work, just shitty couple of hours a day, and you're already making $7, $8, $9.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, you're already making $7, $8, $9. So these people are making 900% more money by working probably an underpaid job in the UK for 25% of the effort than what they'd be doing in India, Bangladesh. So from then on, it's like it's fucking gold mine. You can send it back in the day. You could send your British passport to anywhere in the world, and that person could then use that passport and arrive before the biometric systems. If I was a Muslim and my wife wore a burqa, all I have to do is send that passport to DHL, FedEx, fast track, straight to Bahrain, straight to Iran, straight to Syria, and then another person can use that passport, Pakistan, wherever. And, that's what was happening. It's just a constant rotation. I mean, think how many times I've had my passport looked at because my photos don't always look like me. And imagine when you're looking at someone that has the same color eyes, the same color hair as most people in India do. It's dark skin, dark eyes, dark hair. Europe is or Caucasians are the only complexion, generally speaking. There are certain places in Africa where there's a slight kind of, variety in eye color and hair color. But generally speaking, it's the only race with a a vast array of different, hair types and
Haircut.
archetypes.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
you can't tell me you can tell the difference if 100 Chinese people rock up, as just an example, and your passport controlled, and everyone's got the same photograph and they're the same age and the same height and the same sex. Could you really turn around to one person and say, I'm sorry, your photo doesn't look exactly like you? We're going to have to do a security clearance. Of course they don't. And this is what was happening. This is why the UK filled up so quickly, because before biometrics, the same passport could be used literally 365 times a year, but 365 different people. There was no security system to prevent that happening. And to be honest, to this day, there still isn't. In places where the biometric system isn't fully employed, you just need to look a little bit like someone in a photograph and you're going to be allowed in the country. And once you're in, you're in. No one's checking. No one's fucking going to find you. I mean, the whole thing's preposterous. And the UK is a dump, and Europe is a dump. And it's a dump because of migrants. Sweden is the rape crime capital of bloody Europe, and none of them are Swedes. None of them. They're all fucking foreigners. Everybody knows this. This is like the Israel thing. We all know it. We're not talking about it. If you removed all of the migrants, at least from the last 30 years, out of the equation, since they've really ramped it up, Europe would be lovely. Now, you walk through the streets of Barcelona, you're going to get pickpocketed. You go on a train in Paris, you're going to get pickpocketed. You go to wherever, and it's not always people up from outside of Europe. A lot of the time it's Romani gypsies or Albanians or people from poorer European countries. But that's still a result of migration. And the policy for implementing or allowing, I should say, countries like Bulgaria and Romania to join the European Union is literally to create divide. These countries offer nothing to the economic hub. They are shit countries, with nothing to offer at all. And so many of them have migrated that Romania has one of the largest declining populations in the world. You can go to Romania now and there's entire villages and towns that are bloody empty. Same as Bulgaria. And what's happening as a result of that, it's a knock-on effect. I'll tell you what's happening as a result of it. Because I was in Bulgaria not too long ago. When you have all this empty space, you have to then fill all the jobs that have been left by those that have migrated to places like Germany or France or Western Europe where they make more money. So what happens? The jobs are filled with people from outside of Europe. So now if you go to places like Bulgaria or Romania, you just see an absolute ton of people from Turkey, an absolute ton of people from the Middle East. And it's a continuous cycle. Eventually everyone will leave the West that has the ability to, native citizens, people that are born and bred there, that have the GBP under their belt or euro, and they go to places like Thailand or Vietnam, which is what people are doing en masse as we speak, because it's cheaper, better food, better weather, cost of living is 1,000% less, and then whole of Europe just becomes a cesspit filled with essentially all the people that have migrated from, either shitty parts of Europe or outside of Europe. And likewise, those places begin to come empty. So places that are lesser on the kind of economic graph, right at the base of the scale, probably places in Africa, end up moving to, say, places in the Middle East. And it's this continuous spiral. It never ends. And should it end? Who knows? Maybe that's the way it should be. I'm not arguing against it, but all I'm saying is it certainly isn't beneficial to any place to have a constant flux and movement. Whether that's just something that's always going to happen is up for debate. But what is for certain is that no stable society exists with a mass migration policy. If you think China has its doors open, China's fantastic. Everything bloody works. Everything functions. Everything is super nice. And you know why? Because there's no gypsies wandering around. There's no dirty people from bloody Bangladesh and India walking around. It's a contained culture. It's a Chinese culture. That's why it works. Same as Japan before they started opening the doors to half of India. Japan was a good country. Now the doors are open because they got an aging population. They're having to replace those jobs lost with migrant workers from the same countries we've been discussing. And eventually 10, 15 years, Japan will fall. And that's why their economy is dumping too. It's the same system. Every successful country in the world is built on a homogenous culture, period. There's no example of a fucking multi-party culture working in known history. Give me an example.
Right. So there are somewhere that actually improved economically that's culturally diverse. Is that the question? Or
Yes.
place or and then also if there are places that are failing that are homogenous. There are like
where?
I'm sure there are several examples. in terms of places that aren't, I mean, all of these places in like the fucking Solomon Islands, all of these sorts of places, I mean, that they offer nothing. They're homogenous places. They literally offer nothing. There's lots of islands in, in Southern Asia, and places like that, they're homogenous. They offer nothing. But there's lots of places that are culturally diverse. I mean, does France offer nothing? Does England offer nothing? Like,
of course it would. Same as the UK. UK is a shithole because of mass migration. Scandinavia, formerly homogenous. Sweden, one of the peaks.
But when you say England's a shit, like, I don't know, England's always had a crime, and
of course,
England, the nation is kind of naturally a bit scummy and boisterous. This is what we are. Like, we're
no. I would say that the level of crime and contamination is a result of mass migration. Period.
So when the Krays running around shooting people in broad daylight in restaurants in the 60s,
that wasn't that common, and that's everywhere. Look at the United States.
It was common, and bank robberies were like daily occurrences, like literally daily occurrences. And like literally, they were having it off, and then things changed. Like people started coming over, and then they started to get a little bit more stringent because it wasn't just like the locals that were having it off. It was everybody was coming in having a little bit, and they've got. I mean, honestly, like the things that go on that don't make the news, the amount of like, and these are like grown men in like their 40s, and 30s and 50s, kidnapping each other and like just murdering each other, especially in the north of England.
This is organized crime. This is crime families against crime families, like the United States, the Italian mob, same such scenario. But when you start having crime that affects the average person, that's something that is certainly a result of mass migration. And again, it's basic logic. It doesn't even have to be debated. If people
there's definitely collateral in all crime. There's going to be collateral damage because it's never clean, is it, with these people? They'll send people out to go and steal people's cars so they can put them through their ringer garages. It's like there is so much going on, and once again, and I could provide statistics and evidence of like there is so much going on, like women and children getting murdered, as a result of who they're affiliated with. This is like, this is a common thing. Like Liverpool is like got to be one of like, the worst places in the world. And it's, and it's English people just like doing absolutely crazy shit because people just do crazy shit like everywhere. But like English culture specifically has always been kind of like criminal. It's always had like a criminal culture. And that's England.
I'm not saying there isn't, violence. That's everywhere in the world, but it's the type of violence that, and also, the economic effect. The resources that are given to those that don't deserve and could be used to educate the lowest levels of society that are native. The reality is that people will come over and undermine the existing population, either because they're actually more skilled at their jobs or they're willing to work for less. Both of those things happen. Often it's a little bit more in the latter case.
I agree. Both things happen. Yeah.
A prime example is when I was at Goldsmiths in London, there was a very well-educated Romanian student, and she was working for £3 an hour in a Thai restaurant in London. She's just taken a job from somebody else. And, that's the reality. When people come from places where they're making $1 a day and a business is offering them, a 75% pay cut of what they ordinarily would give to, because they should legally, a native, that's still going to be probably a couple of 100% more than what they'd be making elsewhere. So they're going to take it, and that means someone's out of a job. And then, if it's not that, it's because they're more skilled. But that's not what a country is supposed to be about. Just because someone's more skilled, you shouldn't have to import skilled labor. You should use your resources to train somebody to be proficient. Even if they're not as proficient, you're still giving a job to somebody whom you are supposed to represent as the governance of said country. That's the whole purpose of having a national identity. But of course, in a globalized world, that doesn't exist anymore. Nobody has any affiliation. And this is coming back round to what the origin of the problem is, which we've discussed already: an underground clique or an overground clique of individuals that have no set loyalty to any nation state, never have and never will. Those that govern the banking system that all countries operate under. And therefore, they're able to slime their way around like the snakes that they are, which is their symbol, coincidentally, and contain themselves under the guise of other cultures, which they exploit and cripple and rebuild continuously since the dawn of time and probably for forever eternity.
So, we said about certain types of jobs. The thing, like, I find that there are lots of things, like this is where, kind of like the cultural enrichment argument kind of like comes into things. There are lots of, jobs and services, that just don't fit in with UK culture. And I'm guilty of this, absolutely. I would not want to work on a Friday night. I would not want to work on a Saturday night. I wouldn't necessarily want to be a food delivery guy, working for, Uber Eats and all of these things that we so heavily rely on. 90-something percent of these employees of these types of jobs are foreigners, everyone from like Brazil to India to, Africans. It's like, that if your food's been delivered, it's going to be Mohammed Sharif that's going to be, delivering your food, or Olu Agimbola, or I don't know, Simeon Fernandez. Like, always, like, literally, if I was to, like, screenshot all of the delivery drivers that I knew, like, I've actually never, ever in all my years of Uber ever had an English person deliver my food. And these jobs are literally available to anybody that apply. Literally anybody can be an Uber driver. As long as you meet the criteria, you can become one. The jobs come through, you accept. So they literally create an ecosystem for us to live an advantaged, lifestyle. At 2 a.m, I can order a kebab because a Turkish guy is willing to fucking work until 2 a.m, fucking making kebabs. We don't do that shit. We will open a fish and chip shop that's not fucking even open on a Sunday, and it shuts at 8 o'clock, on like a Friday night. And I remember those days. I remember the days when there weren't as many migrants, and everything was dead. Everything was dead at 11 p.m. It was just like, okay.
The argument, which is often used by lots of pro-migration fucking libtards, is that no one's willing to do the job, right? This argument does not stand ever. If there's demand for a job, you're always going to find a native willing to do the job. All you have to do is pay them more, period. If you can't afford to pay them, the demand isn't sufficient enough, therefore the job isn't worthy. A lot of these jobs exist to essentially sustain a population of individuals who aren't native in the first place. The idea that everyone in England wants to go out and drink on a Saturday or Friday night and therefore there aren't enough British bartenders to serve is absurd.
No. Bartenders, absolutely. Because once again, like, bartenders get to drink on the house. Like, that suits like the British culture, and hence you get lots of British bartenders. You do, but people that work in kebab shops, so yeah, maybe that work in McDonald's, yeah, definitely, you get that. But generally speaking, like, I just thought to be like, literally, like, almost. I don't think I've ever had an Uber. Actually, as an Uber driver, that's like a 40-50 grand a year job. Like, you put in the hours, you make money for sure. But what you do get, most of the black cab drivers will be English, for example, even though, it is diverse, it's predominantly English. But yeah, there's just like so many things. And like I said, like fast food joints up in, that, or family run, because all of these, Turkish and Indian chicken shops, they're all like family businesses, aren't they? They're not like big chains. Yeah, they're either small franchises or family run businesses.
It doesn't benefit society. It's better to have somebody that's half-hearted at their job, that's a national, that is going out and spending the money that they make, rather than having someone that's making twice as much, putting twice the number of hours in to save almost 100% of what they gain to take back to their home country, which happens. And actually, this is evidenced in the data set from this year, very recently. Remittance companies are probably the best investment opportunity in the world, because continuously and consistently since their inception, they've been becoming more and more profitable because there's more and more people working abroad, and all of the money that they make, they send back to their families at home. They're not spending it in bars and pubs and on pointless jeans that they already have 20 pairs of and another fucking 5 pairs of Nike slippers or whatever. And, that's really realistically what you want in a culture. I mean, fundamentally, what you should be doing is always sponsoring the native population. But this idea that just because someone works harder and makes more money, that they somehow benefit through to the society is not true at all. None of that money is being, there's fucking no taxes being paid for a start, but that's beside the point. But none of that money is actually going back into the economy. They're there to scrimp and save, to make money to go back home. They have no loyalty to the country whatsoever. They do not want to live there. And why the hell would they? Why would they want to live a mediocre existence in, say, the UK with miserable weather and miserable food when they can scrimp and save for 2 years, go back to India and buy like 5 mansions?
But the thing is that a lot of them do want to live here, and like their children go to school here, and they're paying extortionate rent for in an overcrowded house to be here, because
they have.
It does exist, and it doesn't exist. It's common. It's like common. Like people do want to come here for the work, but people don't want to be fucking burning their ass with 38 Celsius. Like a lovely 4 seasons. You might get snow a couple of times a year. Like, in fact, English weather's quite. I don't know. Like, I mean, I like it. Could it be a bit more sunny at times? Yes. Do I like being cold? No. But it's not extreme. It's nice. It's nice weather. Like, England's a fucking sound country.
The UK is a good country, but I mean,
of course, you want to live here. Loads of people want to live here because it's fucking great. Of course, they do.
No, they do want to live here. They live in a community.
Got laws, like the police would actually investigate crime from time to time. Like they'll actually do stuff for you. You've actually got rights, and this is the reason why people come here.
People naturally gravitate towards their own culture. Period. That's the reality. People gravitate towards their own culture. That's why you go to London. You have a Pakistani community, an Indian community. Every culture you can imagine exists in ghetto form, just like New York. The Italians, the Polish, the Jewish, the French. That's the reality of the world. People want to be around their own. And to argue against that is to argue against biology. That's just the most part.
See,
I'm going to have to watch, by the way, just for the audience. It's 55. My flight was supposed to be in 25 minutes, which I should check as well. So
you should probably head to the gate. Oh, fuck. My battery's on 4%. Lucky I checked for that. But yeah, in regards to the last point, I think there's an element of nature and nurture as to why people appear to have these like tribal congregations, with so-called, because with me, I'm talking to people that think that, not people that look like me, but people that think like me, are people that I'm going to be generally more attracted to, people that I have like common interests with. It's like, I don't know, if you're, yeah. And I think that's the case for a lot of people. But then a lot of people also have, so sorry, somebody's trying to call me. I hope that hasn't interfered with the sound quality. Yeah. So I think a lot of people are maybe conditioned to, just look for what they're like, especially actually, which is something I'm going to say is one of the downsides to Asian culture, is like, this like honor killings, and like their daughters must not marry outside of the community or outside of the caste, and and these sorts of things. A lot of that's kind of like, it's like they want to be more I don't know, liberated, for lack of a better term. They want to mix, and they want to see different things and not be so restricted in what they can do. But their culture says otherwise. there's a real nature nurture argument, and I would say it's more nurture purely based again on working with children and seeing how, as people get older, they tend to be more defined and, refined into these groups for self-interested purposes. Because for social standing, for to gain respect amongst peers, out of fears, strength in perceived strength in numbers, all of these reasons. Yeah, it's a very interesting one, but maybe we can speak about that in episode number 33, nature versus nurture.
No, absolutely. Perfect timing. If your phone's on 4%, that's yes, a good time to end it all. I hope it did record, and yes, for the audience, I hope episode 32 was good, and hopefully for 33, like you say, we'll have something planned.
Yeah.
It is a episode, likewise 30 and 60 and 66 if we make it that far. But it was a good topic. It's one of those things that we can always talk about for hours on end. It's
absolutely like literally surface. We've done 76 minutes and we could have gone on for 76 more minutes easily. So
100%. I've got exactly 1 hour now to grab a shower and get to the gate, so it's all perfect.
All right. Well, a pleasure as always. Always, nice to hear your oration. And we, hope that you have a lovely time in Korea. That's where you're heading off to now, right?
Seoul, although now my flight says boarding soon, so I'm confused. But yeah, Seoul, it's going to be like -5 on Wednesday at night. I completely forgot where Seoul was located when I booked the flight. So yeah, bit silly of me, but it is what it is.
Yeah, you didn't go for the weather. What are you going there for? Why are you going to Seoul? You try to take their Seoul. You're gonna get a really shitty job and then send money back to your Monzo account.
Wait, say it again.
No, I was just saying that you're going to get a really shitty job in Seoul because the weather's shit. So I don't know why you'd go there and just get like a little shitty job, or just somehow embezzle funds from them and and send them.
I was waiting for the Russian visa, and I just had some time to kill, and then they were like, "Oh, we're not going to let you in." So I was like, so I have all these places, these trips to pointless places now, until back to Central Asia. But anyway, I will speak to you soon. Speak to everyone soon, and look forward to episode 33.
All right, should travel now, people.
Yeah. Au revoir.